Welcome, everybody. We're delighted to have you back for our third installment of the webinar series that the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture is hosting with the McGrath Institute for Church Life. I'm joined again by my wonderful friend and colleague, Jess Floyd, and I'll introduce myself and then Jess can introduce herself. I'm, of course, Carter Snead. I'm a professor of law at the University of Notre Dame, where I also have the privilege of directing the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Culture.
And I am Jess Floyd. I direct the Notre Dame Office of Life and Human Dignity in the McGrath Institute.
So for those of you who have joined us before, you know that we've teamed up to bring a series of panel discussions to discuss the wide-ranging impact of the Dobbs decision, both for medical care providers, policymakers, and most importantly, for the well-being of women and children and families and communities as well. Our first panel and our second panel dealt with questions concerning doctors and patients, as well as practitioners and the pursuit of their professional vocations. And today we're going to be broadening the conversation out a little bit more to a group of experts who are engaged in public policy research, the direct services of care to moms and families in need, both in terms of the Women's Care Center, as well as in the delivery of medical care. And of course, we're joined also by a real live representative senator from the state of Louisiana. We'll introduce our panelists individually in a moment, but this conversation is going to be more about public policy, law, and direct services in a way that improves the landscape and creates a world in which mothers and babies and families are cared for rightly, both protected by the law, of course, but also welcomed into life and surrounded by a civilization of love built through all of our individual and collective efforts. This is, again, this being our third installment, we want to focus on the future and what kind of a roadmap or blueprint might look like. And so we're going to introduce our panelists. One of our panelists is Mr. Patrick Brown, who is a fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C., where he works on these types of questions.
Dr. Catherine Callahan is the Associate Director at Memorial Hospital's Family Medicine Residency Program in South Bend, Indiana, and an adjunct professor through the Hillbrand Center at Notre Dame. And Jenny Huntsberger is the Vice President of Women's Care Center, which happens to be the nation's largest pregnancy resource center.
And we're also have the wonderful privilege of being joined by Senator Katrina Jackson, who's a state senator from Louisiana, District 34, a Democrat representing her district in that state. Now, just as a reminder, if you have a question at any point, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. If we don't have a chance to get to your question during today's discussion, we will do our best to answer them in another format. And if you're in need of technical support, please chat technical support using that function on Zoom as well. For anyone who needs closed captioning for today's conversation, you can click on the button at the bottom of your screen that says Live Transcript, and you should be able to choose View Subtitle in the drop-down menu to access that feature.
So as we think about the vision that Carter has just given us, what does the future look like for the flourishing of women and families? We'd like to ask each of our panelists to sort of reflect on that, given their particular sphere of influence. We know from a study that the McGrath Institute did several years ago that Americans don't want abortion, that they do favor sort of restrictions on abortion. They also really want to see more practices, policies, laws that support the family, that support women, that support children, to create the civilization of love and a society where it's easier to choose life. So I'd like to start with Patrick, and then we'll go to each of our panelists to, given sort of that this is the goal, what do you see as the most essential steps we need to take in building a future where women and children are protected, valued, and loved?
Well, that's the most important question, I think, facing our politics right now. And thanks, Jess and Carter, for the invite to spend some time talking about this question with an all-star panel. I'm really excited about this. I think for a long time, those of us who are pro-life have kind of bristled at the accusation, like, oh, you guys are only cared about the baby until they're born. Where is this social support for moms who are facing crisis pregnancies and babies who are in low-income households? And we all know that's basically a slur. There's great work being done by folks like Birthright and some of the folks on this call who are on the front lines of providing medical support and social support and building, really walking with pregnant women. But in a post-Dobbs America, that's going to become more important than ever. Obviously, morally important. It's essential for us to be talking about that, but politically as well, because I think, as you alluded to in your question, there's a lot of Americans who are vehemently pro-choice and a lot who are vehemently pro-life, but I think the vast majority of Americans are sort of in that mushy middle where they are uncomfortable with abortion. Maybe they're personally opposed, but they know somebody who's gotten one, or they don't really like the idea of a mom who, is in poverty or, has children at home that she's already struggling to feed. We want to make sure that those people who we can reach out to and say, hey, look, we're serious about being authentically pro-life. And we have policies in place that are going to reach out and again, build that sort of community of support around that woman. So I think there's certainly a role for government to play in catalyzing a lot of the work that's already being done. And I think we're seeing in some states, Texas, for example, when they passed their SB 8 bill last year or 2021, they also included a huge increase in support for their Alternatives to Abortion program, providing funding for crisis pregnancy centers that work with moms when they're pregnant. Indiana, as you guys know, and we're involved in, passed, I think, $40 million for their Hoosiers First Family Fund. That, again, provides resources and support for pregnant moms. And I think that's important for states that are going to be passing laws to protect life in the womb, to be addressing the other side of the equation. It's not just enough to talk about restricting the supply of abortion. We also need to be serious about addressing some of the demand side as well, those economic factors and some cultural factors that make women feel like abortion is the only alternative for them. And I'll just close by saying I think there's room on the federal level to talk about this as well. I'm a huge fan of what Senator Rubio proposed in the wake of the Dobbs decision, which would provide some additional funding for traditional safety net programs like the SNAP program that is for women, infant, and children, providing nutritional assistance for them, but also mentorship programs for moms and making sure they're connected to community support organizations and again, building those personal connections that are essential for helping moms feel like they're not alone when they're facing these situations.
Thank you so much, Patrick. I'd like to sort of move to Jenny because Patrick mentioned those organizations that are working directly with women. And we know that crisis pregnancy centers, pregnancy support centers have really been under threat, both physical threat, but also legislative threat since Dobbs. And, Women's Care Center is the largest pregnancy care center in the country. You're in different states facing different realities. What is that like? What do you see as the role of the Crisis Pregnancy Center going forward, both for the woman and also for her community?
Well, Jess and everyone, thanks so much for having me on, for having this discussion, this series. I mean, really, to be part of this 3-part series is quite an honor. So I'm really grateful for that. And I just, as I was thinking about this question, I thought we really need to hit, just to start off, the question, this today in this environment isn't even appropriate for a place like Women's Care Center, Pregnancy Resource Center to participate when we're talking about long-term care for women and families, when there is post-Dobbs all of this conversation about fake clinics and pregnancy resource centers that at best deceive women and at worst actually cause harm. And so I can only speak for Women's Care Center, but we are the largest pregnancy resource center in the country with 34 centers in 12 states. And I can say categorically that we are not a fake clinic and that we are very, very beneficial for women and for families. So just kind of briefly to address the whole fake clinic question, when this is asked to me, I say, and I think that many of our friends at other centers would say things like, look at our logo. We have a logo of a woman kissing a baby. That we were a fake clinic, we certainly wouldn't be doing that. Our publications, our websites say that we don't perform abortions. We are forthright. We are honest and open and transparent with our clients. Our relationships with women are based on trust. You don't begin a relationship that's dependent on trust with a lie or deception. And additionally, when you look at things like how do women come to us, nearly 6 out of 10 of our clients come to us as a referral by a family member or a friend, or they're returning for a second or maybe third pregnancy. And right now, yesterday, I pulled the stat yesterday, 13,012 babies. That's incredible. 13,012 babies are expected to Women's Care Center moms. And we are really, really proud of our outcomes where we are right now, that over 9 in 10 women who come to Women's Care Center choose life, that the average birth weight of babies born to Women's Care Center moms is over 7 pounds, that we have in the last 5 years, women have come to parenting classes, and men, moms and dads have come to parenting classes over 200,000 times. And we distribute millions and millions and millions of diapers and cribs and car seats and prenatal vitamins and baby books, all sorts of things. And as we start to talk about care, it's really important to know that at Women's Care Center, women come to us an average of 5 times during their pregnancy. Our scope of care is deep and it is long. And I think that as we have this conversation, I want to really highlight that women who come to Women's Care Center are really coming. Many of those women, in fact, most of those women represent underserved communities. And so I looked at a comparison of the unduplicated women who have come to Women's Care Center in the last 5 years. So 126,997 women who we have served over the last 5 years. And I looked at that compared to the national averages. The reason that I'll tell you why I did that before I share the numbers. And it's because we are serving at Women's Care Center and at centers like Women's Care Center, we are serving underserved and at-risk women. And these are, when I say that, I mean women who are at increased risk of adverse pregnancy outcomes, of maternal and infant mortality. That's what we're talking about. And that these moms have babies that are on average weigh 7 pounds, 1 ounce. So on average, our women of color, 62% of our clients are women of color. The national average is of women who give birth, 48%. Our clients are 49% are under 25 years old. Nationally, that's 28%. 81% of our clients are single moms. Nationally, 41%. And on average, our clients are 80% of them have a high school diploma or a GED. On average, it's 94%. So what we're talking about is really serving women who are at the highest risk of having negative outcomes. And when we serve them, they have really great outcomes. And that's because of the model of care that we provide. So it is marked by, when we're talking about care, we're talking about skilled counseling and accompaniment from the moment a woman finds out that she's pregnant until she sends her little one off to kindergarten. And it's a strengths-based model. And in that, what we do is you just simply hold a mirror so that the woman sitting across from you can see her own dignity, her unique and unchangeable strengths, her goodness. So we know that an unplanned pregnancy can feel overwhelming or impossible. And it can feel like a runaway train of, I can't, all these, I can't, it's impossible. But when a woman is reminded of what she has done and who she is, that train slows down. She has a minute to think, and she makes decisions that align with her core values, her desires, and her goals. And we're incredibly grateful that in that environment, over 9 in 10 women choose life. As you said, Jess, women want to choose life. They need to be given the support and the opportunity to do so. But supporting women in a choice for life is not enough. The challenges and struggles that make the pregnancy a problem still remain, right? So at Women's Care Center, we promise to walk with a woman every step of the way, to be an advocate, a guide, and a resource for material support for years to come. So that means parenting classes, individual goal sessions, material support, community resources networking. It means signing people up for Medicaid, finding childcare, navigating the system, and navigating the terrible twos. It's all of it. This is the steady work of accompaniment, and that's what we're doing. So we have learned in our 38 years of existence that the promise of ongoing care, that a woman is not on her own, that makes all the difference. And that impact makes a difference beyond a choice for life. It involves everything that she does. So I'll say that immediately following Dobbs, our first priority at Women's Care Center was to double down on what we were doing, double down on care for women. And we knew that there would be uncertainty, that there would be uncertainty among clients about the availability of abortion. And then the social outcry of injustice would also increase the stress of unplanned pregnancies on women who were already feeling stress. And in many ways, we found that it has. We at Women's Care Center, we've had to learn much about ever-changing laws in 12 different states and about abortion pills by mail. And we're going to spend the next year learning, providing advanced counselor training on teaching resiliency skills. The circumstances have changed. That is true. But the needs and the care are the same. And at the end of the day, our work is not so much about abortion as it is about supporting women so they can choose life and become great moms to healthy kids. That's what we're doing, and that is our vision for the future.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's an inspiring, extraordinarily inspiring story, and we're so grateful and so honored that the Women's Care Center got its start here, adjacent to Notre Dame, and it's and we're still excited that you guys received the Evangelium Vitae Medal Award from the.
So are we.
Yeah. So, Senator Jackson, you were I don't want to embarrass you, but you're a hero and a role model for really statesmen and stateswomen everywhere across the country, and I would say even the world, a person who brings to bear a kind of consistent ethic of life that crosses all different kinds of boundaries and confuses people because they don't understand. Aren't Republicans supposed to be one way and Democrats? Like, they don't get it. And it's such a fantastic sign of contradiction that you are. We would love to hear from you, from your perspective as a lawmaker, and a very important lawmaker, really a trailblazing lawmaker. What do you see as a general matter, is the way forward here now, in the wake of Dobbs, which we celebrate as an opportunity to care for moms and babies and families in a new and deeper and more comprehensive way. Give us your sort of general thoughts. We'll drill down to specific topics among all of the speakers momentarily, but what's your general 30,000 foot impression of, like, what should we be doing? What are you doing? I know you're so busy and so creative. What's going on? What do you think? What's your reaction?
My first thought is this: thank God for Dobbs, right? And that's for me and where we are now. My reaction is the same it was post Dobbs, and that was this: that at some point we had to be about more of taking care of the women and children. It was a major advocacy to get to the point where we are in Dobbs now, right? But we still have the same problems that are existing in those underserved communities. And that is the reality that we deal with every day. And that's the reality that we've been dealing with. So how do we go forward? One thing is social programs, not only making them more accessible, but examining them. I've become a huge proponent of examining social programs nationally and at the state level to determine whether or not they're hand up or hands out, whether or not a woman can get to the point that she can care for her children without needing those social programs. Right now in Louisiana and probably all over the country, but in Louisiana, if you offer a woman with 2 children a job at $13 or $14 an hour, she's essentially cut off of most of her benefits. So it's actually more economical for her to stay on benefits instead of becoming gainfully employed. We all know, and we know this, if you don't have a physical or mental disability, the best way to care for your child is to make a living wage. The problem is most entry-level jobs are not living wage jobs. So what happens is we are somehow as a society perpetuating women to stay on public assistance where they cannot properly take care of their children. That is a major hindrance. So I know that brings something new to the conversation, but I've been talking about that a lot lately with some of my colleagues. How would it look if we actually, came into a place of really helping women with living wage jobs? And how will we transform and amend the social benefits to get to that point, right? And what would that look like? And so that's where I am right now. How do we do that? How do we make sure that happens, that women are actually, and people say, why are you talking about that with abortion? Well, I talked about this and I've been talking about this. A lot of people are offering abortion as the remedy to poverty in underserved areas, especially in minority areas. So the right now in that is that snapshot. If we go further into what can we do today? The young lady that spoke before me, Jenny, be honest, she talked about it. These pregnancy centers are key to helping women that find themselves in that situation. As lawmakers, after we review and actually revert some of the programs and reform them to being hand-ups, where we're not totally cutting women off benefits when they're starting their careers, because we know they're not making a livable wage when you first enter the workforce, right? Unless you are a college graduate and you have some type of licensure or something like that. And most of the time you're not. Past that, and enacting policies that really, number one, what Louisiana did, we actually came in and and allocated some of our extra funds to pregnancy care centers, to Right to Life groups, to people who were actually on the ground serving women and children. And then our educational system, I think I can speak for Louisiana real clearly when I say we're still chipping away at that. But mothers are having to choose whether or not, to have children based on their economic situation and how well their children will perform in school. So your educational system is very important. Looking at those states who still have educational systems where their zip code determines whether or not they receive a good, proper, and strong education. And then your healthcare system comes into play. One thing that Governor Edwards did from the offset of being sworn in within 2 days, probably the next day, was he accepted Medicaid expansion. I know that's highly debated, but what Governor Edwards said is the only thing right now that's there to ensure that the working class, the indigent working class mothers around this state have health care once they leave the hospital. What did that mean? That, we wanted to make sure that they could take care of themselves, that we had healthy mothers for healthy deliveries. Another thing he's recently done with the approval of CMS, he submitted for the LDH with our support and legislation, was to ensure that when women leave the hospital from having children, they're not immediately cut off of Medicaid benefits. They've extended that for a year, even if they weren't originally eligible, because people never look at the postpartum part of it, what women experience afterwards, and how they're able to take care for their child. An unhealthy mother can't care for a newborn properly. She does her best, but there is still a struggle there. So basically, that's where we are on policy. Now, as we move forward, my push in our state, and I would recommend it to advocates everywhere, is push for funding for pregnancy centers. your state legislators fund so much, right? And then push for funding in education. You hear teachers crying out all over the nation. This is a national issue with certified teachers leaving the classroom. That's going to be an issue for mothers who are considering what to do, and whether or not, how they proceed in these states that still have legalized abortion, right? So my thought is that in order to get to a point where we see an abortion-free America, if that is your advocacy, like it's mine, right? Or even if you're pro-choice and you believe that a woman shouldn't have to make the choice on whether or not to have a child or to expand her family, to advocate for these policies, because the choice between having your child shouldn't be based on poverty. And that's where we are. And that's why you see in certain zip codes, you see a larger percentage of women seeking abortion, because we've made the answer somehow in America for women in poverty who are determining whether or not to have a child. We've made the answer to poverty abortion. Now, I don't know if that was the intent of Roe versus Wade, but that has been its application. And so it's time for us, I believe, to stand up as a nation and recognize that we send money all over the country, and I agree with that. I am majorly supporting the Ukrainians right now and hoping that they stand strong. I think we have a moral obligation to them. But what we need to remember is we also have a moral obligation to those men and women who are trying to expand their families on limited incomes, who find themselves with an unplanned pregnancy, and we need to help them make the right decision. That's where I am with it. Now, people say, well, Katrina, it seems like you advocate for everyone to be on social programs. I don't. And I think that's the problem with social programs, is that right now, there is no matriculation off of them. There's no stepping process for a mother or a father who's trying to come off of social programs and actually take care of their children. It's either you qualify or you don't. There's no kind of matrix that helps you reduce the benefits as you go forward until you're to that state's livable wage, because we know minimum wage doesn't take care of anyone. In the state of Louisiana, would it be $7.25 an hour? I mean, come on, for a mother and child working 40 hours a week, that is a joke in and of itself, right? And so we have to look at that. And if we're really serious about what we're talking about doing, we've passed the phase of Roe. Now, if you're in a state where abortion is still legal, of course, you're advocating to your state legislators who are making those decisions now. But at the same time, you have to be an advocate for women and children in every area. The whole life concept is not something that was pulled out politically. The whole life concept is something that we all owe to our fellow man in each household. And I cannot for the life of me understand how our Constitution and the Supreme Court has expanded on the right to an equal education, right? And we're still not living it. Your education still is based on your zip code, your quality of education. Those are things that America has known that existed prior to Roe, after Roe, as long as we've been fighting against Roe, which we should, but we still have not answered. So I would say some of this fight has to be taken to Congress. Of course, we know they're trying to codify the Roe versus Wade, but past that, really taking a bold step and saying, how do we advocate for our social programs to be reformed? How do we make sure that mothers who are trying to come out of poverty have an opportunity to come out of poverty? Because right now, this is the truth, and it's sad to say, a woman who enters the workforce right now on social benefits that doesn't make a living wage makes less than staying at home because of all the things she has to pay out of that paycheck when those benefits are totally cut off. That is the reality. So that's how you become a part of what we call the working poor, because our welfare system, our benefits, would rather see you stay on benefits. And this is what it says by what's implemented for 40 years instead of matriculating off of it. So how do we deal with the reality of what this country has done? And how do we advocate to Congress to change these social programs, not to kick people off, but to make sure people can come off and become, a part of the working class and not the poor working class? That to me is the question and the answer. All in one.
Thank you so much for that, Jess.
Senator Jackson, thank you so much. Katie, I'd like to turn to you to really pose the same question, but in the sphere of the practice of medicine. From the 30,000 level, what do we need to be doing to think about what a future looks like for women and children where abortion isn't sort of the de facto choice, or you might call it an unchoice because of certain circumstances? How do we ensure the maternal health and safety of mom and baby? What do you think about sort of all of that?
Thank you so much, Jess and Carter and all of you for the opportunity to be a part of this conversation. It's such an honor, and I've frankly been moved by all of the panelists that have spoken so far. So thank you again so much for the opportunity to be here today. I guess I'd like to start by just acknowledging that while I'm a single person, I frankly think that parenting is one of the hardest jobs on the planet. And I tell that often to the folks that are close to me, to my family and friends, but I tell it to my patients a lot too. And I think it's important for my remarks to be couched within that reality, because while that is tough for anyone, anyone who has resources, who has a higher degree, who has loads of folks of layers of support, whether that's in parents or friends, I think that is exponentially more difficult for someone who is a parent under unplanned circumstances and amidst any number of other hardships. As a family physician, I see this time and time again. I get the opportunity to accompany individuals from birth to death. And many of my patients are really the demographics that Jenny spoke about, that the Women's Care Center sees. There's a lot of overlap between the patients that I care for and the folks that are being cared for by the Women's Care Center. So these are low socioeconomic status households, often undereducated, overstretched in terms of the responsibilities and numbers of people that they're trying to care for on these living, less than living wage salaries that Senator Jackson spoke to. And frankly, I think it's nothing short of astounding to look at the vast number of obstacles that women and couples with these socially complex pregnancies have to overcome in their journey as parents. So with that background in mind, and really with the help of some extraordinary friends and colleagues that I get to work alongside in the city, I want to offer you a few strategies. I'm going to point to 4 different things that I see as essential priorities for us in building a world where vulnerable, underserved women and men, as well as their children, can thrive and flourish. And to start, I think each of the panelists have spoken to the importance of programming, and I just want to emphasize that. I can do some things in the 4 walls of my office as a family physician, but there are so many needs that these families have that, frankly, I just can't meet. I wasn't trained to meet them, and I don't have the resources to do that inside my office. So I think places like the Women's Care Center become just essential community partners for us to ensure equitable access to these programs, regardless of race or socioeconomic status, is absolutely imperative. And I think we need to increasingly think outside the box and harness our creativity and our innovation to find novel approaches for these kinds of wraparound services from the top down. It's so fun to hear Senator Jackson speak about the ways in which we can be doing this from a policy and law level. I think absolutely those are places where we need to do that. And we have to be willing to meet patients where they are and to recognize that every layer of these services are going to be extremely important. For me as a physician, I have to have patience and flexibility. And I would encourage anyone in the medical profession who might be listening in on this call to be thinking about the ways in which we can demonstrate and embody patience and flexibility with the recognition that these parents have been formed in extremely chaotic and impulsive and disorganized environments. And we need to have a lot of empathy for that and to recognize that it makes a lot of sense that they experience continual chaos and impulsivity and disorganization, both internally and externally. They have lots of good reasons to be late to appointments, to require multiple repetitions, to need some extra ancillary staff person to really make the phone call to follow up with one of these resources and organizations. That may not be something that they can do because they don't have enough minutes on their cell phone in the plan that they've bought this particular month. They might not have a stable enough social reality that they go home to, that they even have a spare minute to make these additional phone calls and follow up. We need people that are willing to step in and really walk that next step with them. And there's sacrifice in this. There's sacrifice monetarily, of course, and there's sacrifice in terms of efficiency. This isn't an efficient way, if you will, to work through from one patient to the next. But frankly, these sacrifices are minuscule in comparison to the sacrifices that these parents are making. And as an aside, to kind of take off of my professional cap and really just recognize my vocation first as a disciple, as a follower of Christ, when we read passages like Matthew 25, this is the invitation to accompany Christ in the distressing disguise of the poor. And I really see that as a Christian physician. I see that as just as much my vocation as anything else, as writing the right prescription or prescribing the right procedure for a patient. Thirdly, I think moms and dads need people, or at least one person who can walk with them through each stage of parenting. I think the Women's Care Center does this beautifully. And I can tell you that there is a diametric difference between the patients that I have that have a model of what it means to parent well and those that do not. In preparation for this talk, I spoke with a friend of mine who fostered a child of a mother who became unexpectedly pregnant in college. This woman had a sky-high IQ, but she was failing out of her undergraduate program. She was immature, undiagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and amidst all of this, she was attempting to navigate her role as a parent. And there was just no way that she was going to be able to nurture this child and become independent without help and support. With the help of this friend, though, of mine and her family coming alongside her, attending doctor's appointments, showing up on sick days and unanticipated leaves that her child needed to have at various points, this woman was able to complete her bachelor's in nursing and to really persist in the hard work of counseling and healing from her trauma. And her son graduated from high school this past spring. And my friend Gwen would tell you that this young man didn't need a better or a different parent. He needed his mom. But that mother benefited tremendously from having the model of my friend Gwen to be able to venture through parenthood with her and to demonstrate to her what love and loving well looked like. And to be just a text or a phone call away amidst every season of her son's development. So if I could prescribe one thing for every underserved woman that has an unplanned pregnancy, it would be to have a model of someone who has gone through this walk of parenting and can really walk alongside and model what it looks like to do this well, to do it from a posture of love and in a way that facilitates thriving. And then lastly, lest any of us think that you have to be a parent to be able to accompany these folks, I think fundamentally, these moms and dads and children need friends. They need people who are willing to show up and continually embody a kind of enduring love that is in it for the long haul, that's willing to humbly journey together toward good and true and beautiful things, that can put the flicker of hope back on top of their candle when it feels like it's snuffed out, that can help navigate, again, doctor's appointments and school drop-offs and unanticipated sick days, who can sit down with a medication list and figure out how to make a pill box that's going to allow someone who has unpaid bills and any number of other fires to put out to take a medication that they need to take every single day. Because so often I think that kind of daily, day in and day out support is what I see these patients lacking. Again, to kind of couch this in the broader perspective of Christianity, I think the invitation to each of us is for Christ to become larger within our own hearts so that we can meet vulnerable individuals and in such a way that they actually encounter Christ when they encounter us. Jesus, whose winsome way never manipulates or coerces anyone into choosing life, but rather woos folks towards that with an unconditional and sacrificial love. And I'm certainly not perfect in that by any means, but I think one question that I hope to leave folks with is, how might we, each one of us, receive this invitation to even journey with one other person in this kind of way? Like I said, I am absolutely still on the learning curve of trying to figure out how to embody this in my practice and in my daily life here in South Bend. I absolutely need loads of grace and mercy to do that well. And to whatever degree I do live into those things, it's because I have a fabulous social worker. It's because I have a wonderful organization like the Women's Care Center and other social resources that I can point patients to do this work well. It's because I have extraordinary friends like Gwen who really set the bar for me in terms of what pro whole life care authentically looks like in the day-to-day. And as a disciple, I just feel increasingly convicted that this work of innovative, creative, attentive accompaniment of vulnerable, underserved women and men and children isn't ancillary, but it's actually central to bringing the good news to life and to allowing Christ's kingdom to really come in our world. Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Kate. That was, as all the remarks have been, that's just so inspiring, and we're lucky to have you as a physician in our community. and all your patients are very fortunate and colleagues as well. Senator Jackson, if we could switch back to you for a second. We were so grateful to have you on our panel, Racism is a Life Issue, some time ago. And the issue of race frequently comes up in the debate over abortion and Dobbs and so on. There are even people, as we know, that would argue and have argued in a very prominent way that the pro-life position is a white supremacist position. It's a position that hurts the Black community. And as opposed to the kind of vision of self-emptying love, where everybody counts and everybody matters that Kate just sketched out and then that you've embodied in your work. First of all, how do we think as a matter of bearing witness in the public square to others who are confused about the question of race and a culture of life? How do we do that in a way that resonates and shapes hearts and minds of people who may not be inclined to agree with us in the first instance in a loving and charitable way? And then also, secondly, can you talk a little bit about how you think about policy and law as applied to communities of color on the question of life, not just restricting abortion, but also in terms of caring for those communities in ways that they need maternal mortality, these kinds of questions, access to basic health care?
Well, that's why I think we first have to recognize that the confusion has come because, and that's why I so hate sometimes when we use tags in politics, but sometimes we have to. There's a distinction to be made between being pro-birth and pro-life. I think the loudest voice in the pro-life movement has been those that are pro-birth, and they never admit that they're pro-birth because it's hard to say, and it's a admission that you never want to make on your own. In policy making, for us, being pro-birth is wanting the Roe versus Wade decision overturned and wanting abortion illegal, with not ever voting for any policy or offering any policy that offers people a helping hand. And that is an issue that the pro-life community faces because the loudest voices in that pro-life community. So I think sometimes people say white supremacy. I don't even know where they get that from, because I've been told for years as an African-American woman that the power of my vote is something that's very powerful. And as we know, Dr. King and others fought for that. And I'm always at functions, and I believe this would say if it wasn't important, people wouldn't fight against your power to vote. There wouldn't be restrictive laws, right? But then when I look at our voter base, and you just go back and you look at Margaret Sanger, right? And her whole thing with the birth of Planned Parenthood at the time, and the letter is out there, Planned Parenthood had to recognize it and take her name off of their buildings, although it got a snippet on Fox, CNN, in MSNBC, CBS. They did a snippet report. I remember because we were at home for COVID, right? And a lot of us didn't have as much to do as we normally would do. And I'm watching the news cycle, and it literally ran for a day or two, and it was off. Planned Parenthood was birthed out of the mindset and mission to eradicate the number of African Americans and other minorities that were being born during that time. And so that's the first response I always have as a woman and as someone that's fighting that this cannot be a white supremacy push amongst pro-lifers, because the major portion of the abortion movement in the United States was birthed from those who believe that Blacks and minorities should be eradicated and that people with disabilities were undesirable. I also think that's something that we leave out a lot in our pro-life stance is how does this impact babies with disabilities? So I know that notion is there, but that's my first response to it. And I think it should be the response, whether you're Black, white, brown, purple, of everyone. How do we become the enemies of African Americans and minorities when the movement was actually birthed to eradicate them? Wrapping back to my voter rights point is this. I tell people all the time that abortion is modern day genocide of African Americans and minorities. That right now we make up 60+% of the abortions in the United States, but only a small fraction of the population. And then if you look at the amount of African American and minority babies that have been aborted, I took that link and said, even if each of them would have had one child, the voting power of minorities in the United States would have grown greater. So I also approach it by that fact and that truth, is that abortion is the enemy to any progress in the African American community because it has drastically decreased our population and in the minority community, period. And so I think where we're going, though, we have to draw that distinction. We have to be able to, in a loving way, call out our colleagues who claim to be pro-life, but actually legislate and advocate as though they're pro-birth. And when I say advocate, because it's just not the congressmen and the legislators everywhere that's doing this, it's those who call their offices 50 times, which you should if you're a constituent, who email them yearly to thank them about what they're doing. We have a lot of constituency across this state in the United States that believes in a pro-birth mantra, but puts on it that they're pro-life. And that is the confusion. And at some point, those who are really fighting for life at every stage of life, who believe that whether a child is in the womb, or 5 years old, or 10 years old, they're precious and they should have access to things that give them the ability to achieve the American dream. At some point, we have to reach that reality that that's who we are, but not separate from others who are pro-birth, but begin to call them out on their policies, begin to call them out on their advocacy. When we do what you're doing, Professor Snead and others as a whole, when we come together and begin to talk about this culture of life and what it means, begin to advocate with louder voices, then that part of the pro-life movement that's pro-birth won't represent nationally what minorities believe to be what it is. Let me say in my state, right? In my state, even those African Americans who are Christians, all right, pastors and everyone who I meet with, they have a really hard time not being pro-life, but agreeing with most of the legislators that I sit in the Capitol with, as they say, well, Katrina, the truth is they're pro-birth. And we can agree with them on this one issue. But then every time a vote comes up that greatly impacts the minority community, we lose them on it. So when does it come a time where you're pro-life or even just past the minority community, Professor Snead, when you look at the things that are happening in education, the drastic cuts Louisiana took about, Lord, it's been a while now. I forget the governor's been in office 7 years, right? Where we had cut higher education by 60%, where our emergency rooms, because we had cut healthcare by a drastic amount, our emergency rooms, it used to take you at that time about 6 or 7 hours to be seen, unless you were, what is it called, a stat, I'm not medical, patient. And we had emergency rooms overflowing with people. We had hospitals saying we cannot survive in this state. In Baton Rouge, we had a hospital that closed its door in the inner city, which was the minority community, for emergency rooms. They kept everything else open, but their emergency room. So you had a large fraction of the largest city in our state who didn't have emergency room care because our government and our legislators had voted drastically to cut healthcare. So for us, right, as minorities, and when you're out there speaking about it, even those Christian-based minorities who do not believe in abortion are saying, I don't understand the pro-life movement. How can you be this hypocritical? How can you wave the flag of the biblical Bible and say you believe in it, if that's what you believe, right? And then come out and continuously cut those things that matter to children and mothers. And that's where we are. And let me tell you, I think that becomes a party issue in some way. So what they're confused about and where they're on the fence about is, how do I remain a part of the Democratic Party, which pushes for abortion? And how do I go to the Republican Party, and I'm very frank on this, which pushes against abortion, but doesn't push for anything else? I think there's a large segment of America, like you said, who doesn't advocate for abortion, but has seen the breakdown of a political system in America that's based on party. So to me, parties have their place, but in this pro-life movement, how do we get back to the center? How do we make minorities understand that we're not the Antichrist, right? That there's not some type of white supremacy push, and that Katrina Jackson has not sold out by holding her values that she believes in, right? How do you get to that point? You get to that point by doing what Governor Edwards and others have done, who took the stance of being whole life and to advocating for cultural life at every stage of life. You advocate, you call the wrong and right, right? And you're not afraid to stand up, and you're not afraid to make tough decisions. That is where, and you see, I'm passionate about that. I get overly winded about that because in some communities, is she selling out? No, I'm doing what my grandmother did. I'm doing what my great-grandmother did. I'm doing what every minority family did before abortion became the platform of the African-American community with a veil over it that was eradicating them. We're raising each other's children. We're sitting at a dinner table, and if someone doesn't have something to eat, we invite their family to the dinner table. That was the culture of the African American community. We did not force abortion upon a female. We walked through the shame of it, if there was any shame, with their family, and we helped them. Right now, I am honored to say, I am raising my 13-year-old nephew, have had him for a year. I had no kids, and so it was a blessing to me. And I can't say that it doesn't come without, missing days from work. I am experiencing what mother experienced. I probably would have missed this today, but I was up all night, and finally his fever broke because right now he has the flu, right? And so experiencing what mothers experience and experiencing my mother sleeping over last night, just in case his fever was still high this morning. Some people don't have that. So you experience the reality of what minority families are now doing, dealing with. But the reality is us, the people who understand the life culture, have not really called those out who are pro-birth, set them at the table and said, look, we can't support you on this one issue alone. You have to come back to the center where everyone is, not the center of compromise, but the center of your focus of taking care of women and children. I think when we do that, we're going to see the minority community not demonize the pro-life community. And I think when you fully engage and explain it, it's more acceptable. And it's the reality of what it is. So what is our advocacy? And how do we move forward at becoming the voice of the pro-life community? Because that's what's going to take, people on this panel becoming that voice and passing that on state after state and conference after conference. How does that look? And that's when the pro-life community, I think, will be largely accepted in the African American and minority community.
Amen, Senator Jackson. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for your witness to what it means to be whole life, truly pro-life. This offers a nice segue back to Patrick, where I'd like to sort of drill down on some of these policy questions. Senator Jackson talked about the difference between pro-birth and pro-life, and you spoke earlier about sort of the mushy middle. Most Americans are uncomfortable with abortion, want better solutions, but again, don't see that and are very ambivalent about the question of abortion. So I'd like you to sort of game out quickly two scenarios of what policy might look like that pro-lifers, whole life pro-lifers can advocate sort of in states that are moving toward even more liberal abortion laws, and states that have adopted restrictions. What might advocates and voters think about in those particular scenarios?
Sure. No, I think those are really important questions, and I just want to say that this all builds on the interpersonal work that folks like Jenny and Kate are doing every day. That is the heart and soul of the pro-life movement, and policy can help shift things in the right direction. But at the end of the day, it's that kind of witness, and I just applaud all the work that they do on a daily basis. And I just also want to endorse so much of what Senator Jackson said as well. I think that kind of leadership and witness in the public square is really important, and it's a shame we don't have more elected officials willing to say the kind of things she was saying. For states that are moving in or considering moving in a more pro-life direction, or at least a more pro-birth direction, I think it's important to meet people in the political context of your state. I'm here in South Carolina. It's a very red state. We have a very aversion to spending too much money on certain social safety net kind of things, and so it's never going to meet California, New York, or something like that in terms of what they're willing to spend. But I think if we focus on kind of how we started this conversation, that first year of life, states like Tennessee and South Carolina have opted into that Medicaid expansion, making sure that moms don't get kicked off Medicaid after 60 days. Rather, they get that full year of coverage to make sure that we are addressing maternal mortality and making sure moms and babies are healthy. That's essential. I'm really glad that some red states have done that, and I hope others do as well. I think that's low-hanging fruit for states like Mississippi or something that have already talked about it but haven't moved on it yet. I hope that they do. But then other things like giving moms who are facing crisis pregnancy a priority when it comes to things like childcare vouchers, or again, some of the traditional safety net programs that have often been associated with the left, but can, I think, in a post-Dobbs America, they're not going to break the bank. Stuff like home visiting programs, where you're funding, social workers and community volunteers and such to meet with moms and make sure they're getting the support that they need and that their babies are healthy and moms are healthy. That kind of stuff can be a bipartisan win. Again, focusing on that first year of life. I think that's where the biggest bang for our buck is. We should definitely be talking about making parenthood more accessible, more affordable, more achievable for people across the lifespan. But I think in this current context that we're in red states specifically, focusing on, again, postpartum care, prepartum and postpartum care, that's going to be where the most likelihood of success is going to be. When it comes to states like California or New York or as we're seeing up in Michigan or some of these other states, that's really tough. And some of it is going to be kind of hold your nose and work across the aisle with some strange bedfellows because there's just much more of a robust advocacy community around things like child benefits or child care benefits or something like that for folks on the left who we were going to vehemently disagree with on what the correct abortion regime is going to be like. And if states like California decide to pass the amendment that's on the ballot there, or the one that's up in Michigan, that's going to make that work even harder. But sometimes that's politics. You got to work within the realm of the possible. And if there's opportunities to find bills that are going to put more money in parents' pocket, or to make sure that women have the health care they need, or their babies have the resources they need, and education, and some of the other stuff that Senator Jackson talked about, I think there's a way to talk in the way that the senator just did about making it clear to pro-choice leaning folks that we don't want women to feel forced into abortion because of economic need. That to me, if you're truly pro-choice and not just pro-abortion, that should be an essential part of what your role in trying to make life easier for women. If you're truly pro-choice, you should be willing to meet pro-lifers halfway when it comes to things like making sure that moms have paid leave and other things like that. So those are tough considerations that get very political, but recognizing, hey, there are certain discrete things we can work on across the aisle, even if we disagree on some of these really emotional and difficult topics. Otherwise, I think that could be a realm that pro-lifers are able to move forward even in very adversarial conditions.
Thank you, Patrick, for that. Friends, we've had kind of an embarrassment of riches today in this conversation. We've had so many wonderful interventions that have been inspiring and insightful. And I'm very sorry to say that we're at the end of the hour. I would love to go for another hour and hear more from Jenny and Kate and the whole panel. Unfortunately, we are time constrained. But let me just briefly say, on behalf of myself and Jess and the McGrath Institute for Church Life and the DeNicola Center for Ethics and Cultures, that we at Notre Dame aspire to be a kind of countercultural beacon for the culture of life movement, and try to transmit and model in our own behavior and our own research and teaching and service and public witness the idea that what's at the core of all of this is unconditional love for everyone, whether we agree or disagree, radical hospitality, self-emptying care for neighbor, of everyone, and everyone is our neighbor. And so we're so inspired by these amazing speakers, and we're so grateful to be able to bring this message to you. Thank you all for joining us, these three panels, and keep your eyes open for future programming on this topic. But we do believe that to be genuinely pro-life means to put women and children and families and communities first. And it's our honor to work through the Blessed Mother's University to make that a reality. So thank you all so much. God bless everybody, and hopefully we'll see you soon.
God bless. Have a wonderful day.